Hello, everyone. My name is Atishay Jain, and welcome back to another episode of the Mental Health Corner podcast. In today's episode, we have yet another very special guest. Miss Margo Walsh attended Phillips Exeter Academy as a part of the class of 1982 and has worked since then as a social entrepreneur, bringing change wherever she goes. She has worked in the investment banking division at Goldman Sachs and has worked to develop the Diversity Roundtable in her numerous years of experience in recruitment and employee development. Then, exercising her social entrepreneurship skills in her extensive and accomplished career, Ms. Walsh founded in 2011 and currently runs an organization called MaineWorks. This organization is dedicated to prison rehabilitation and providing individuals with the opportunity to re-enter back into the workforce. Over the last decade, matched with her unparalleled skills in economics and business, Ms. Walsh has brought about tangible change to the lives of a countless number of individuals and is on a consistent effort to provide a mentorship and assimilation for people of diverse backgrounds. She deals with mental health awareness on a consistent basis, and it remains one of the core measurable social missions of our organization. With that, I'm so excited and privileged to welcome Ms. Walsh to the podcast today. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Atishay. What a pleasure and an honor to be part of your message. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here again, Ms. Walsh. So just to get started, if you could share a little bit about your social justice mission with MaineWorks and what led you through to making the organization, that would be really great.
Of course. And thank you so much again. This is such an honor to be part of this really complicated and emerging landscape of mental health awareness. And I'm really proud of the work that you're doing at school and the message that you're carrying. So in terms of how this all happened, in 2011, out of my own recovery, because I'm in recovery from substance use disorder, which I can tell you a little bit about afterwards. In 2011, I started volunteering at what's referred to as the wet shelter, which means there's a shelter in Portland, Maine, where if you were visibly drunk or disorderly, rather than bringing you to jail, because that sets off a whole series of incarceration-related, criminal offense-related stigma, they would bring you to this wet shelter, which was quite literally a place where people who were actively drinking and disorderly would go and sleep it off, and then the next day get up and be released again to usually have that cycle happen there again. In any case, I was volunteering there and just folding clothes and folding blankets, and I hosted a couple of meetings there for people that were at that center. And at the same time, I started volunteering, just by happenstance, at the Cumberland County Jail Pre-Release Center, which means that people who are ready to be released to the community will pass through this pre-release center. They have to earn that privilege, but once they do, they're able to pass through and then start working once released. Actually, while they're living there, they're able to start working, which was the key, I thought. So as a volunteer, I thought, and as a recruiter by profession, which was my investment banking world and consulting world, I thought, wow, these people are all here with the intention of working, but their employment outcomes are very limited because of their proximity to Dunkin' Donuts across the street or McDonald's. And so it was quite easy for the jail to make sure everybody was kept sort of under scrutiny, kind of because of proximity. So they would just let them work in those places. And I thought, well, I could find them a better outcome, because I felt that a broader outcome that would involve physical work would provide it happened to be a lot of young men. And I thought that they would be more engaged during the course of the day and able to kind of tire themselves out and then spend the evening doing recovery-based work, which is what they were also expected to do. That would also set them up for a career in the construction industry rather than just passing through a job that where people expect turnover, like in the fast food services industry. So I went around and knocked on construction site trailer doors with my accounting, my background in recruiting, certainly with my ability to make connections and meet people, all of those construction sites were eager. They said, sure, we are delighted to take people. If they're under your care and custody, that's even better. And we'll keep them here for a finite time frame from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m., keep them really busy all day. And then if they come back the next day, all they need to do then is prove themselves through that kind of active interview process, rather than having it be based on any resumes or past experiences, which I love, because that made it feel like, in this case, their job pursuits were merit-based and not based on their history, which of course had been bogged down by the criminal justice system, understandably. So I started MaineWorks, and that's what it is. It's a social employment company. And everyone in that pre-release setting, and as I mentioned, the other environment of that wet shelter, there's an expectation that most of the people who are arrested under the influence of or for behavior derivative of substances in some way, shape, or form. Theft, weapons charges, drug charges, all of those go hand in hand with a history of substance use. And that is typically what informs a lot of the criminal behavior in the state of Maine. And then as you look at it across the country, it's ubiquitous across the country. So my premise was find a better way forward, and with supports, and then really work in earnest to support people in that transition period. And that will lead to better outcomes, which it has.
Thank you so much for sharing your origin of MaineWorks and the success that it has been today. So as far as the mental health concerns of inmates goes, according to statistics, 64% of jail inmates, 54% of state prisoners, and 45% of federal prisoners have reported some mental health concerns after they leave prison and are reintroduced and reintegrated into the workforce, and general society itself. So how do you feel that through your organization in MaineWorks, the individual's mental health can be bettered, whether it is by providing them that opportunity to work or providing like some sort of special rehabilitation classes? Or what do you see as being the main importance of, first of all, the importance of taking care of one's mental health after they leave prison, but also into that reintegration of society and the role that mental health plays?
So Atishay, that's really complicated because it actually goes further upriver to early childhood, of course. And we're also seeing a huge correlation between ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, and pre-existing mental health challenges. And in our case, actually at MaineWorks, we've done some just informal analysis of the fact that every single person that comes through MaineWorks identifies as having been pulled out of class for behavioral issues or learning challenges. So, that's very clear for someone who knows a lot about early childhood behavioral issues to say there's an attentional problem, and that often leads to anxiety. So there's the ADHD, ADD, and anxiety and depression all fold real, and anxiety is the big one, because if you are under those circumstances, a lot of people seek self-medication, and so that's what we see turning up in teenage years. That feeling of I'm either going to be one of the kids that goes through high school in a functional straight line where I play sports, I might play a musical instrument, I'm decent in school, I attend certain things, and then all the other students who don't fit any of those tidy, lanes. So they tend to group, and they tend to adhere to whatever is the lowest common denominator, if that makes sense. And then the stress level skyrockets because there's all this anxiety about fitting in. So substance use is the great equalizer. Substance use creates a feeling of of fitting in and taking the edge off all of that anxiety. So those behaviors and those circumstances permeate into late teens and early 20s, because I know you are really interested in brain science. And as you know, brain science says that the growth of young brains is still, escalating in the early 20s. So you can imagine that people who are involved with substance use, as I was, it tends to put the big blanket on that development and dampen down the need to respond to those stressors with other coping mechanisms. And so that becomes amplified even further under the circumstances of jail or prison. Very stressful. The behavior that's expected of people within the jail and prison system is antithetical to normal socialization. It prioritizes isolation. And so that further alienates people. So as you can see, you've got a whole quagmire of mental health challenges preceding incarceration, during that behavior time for which people are being arrested, and then the incarceration itself is profoundly isolating and dehumanizing. And so the younger people are involved in those circumstances where they're reinforced, the more likely they are to come out and be even further behind on the social development scale. So we have found the antidote to that has been the sense of community that people experience while they're at MaineWorks, where they have a sense of belonging, rigor, and structure. They have expectations of them. And we feel that that's the base level mental health opportunity, is to create rigor and structure in the form of employment and reliable, people can expect what's going to happen next. And we're very clear about expectations and all that. And part of our integrative services through our nonprofit is to meet with a case manager to talk about, now what, how are you going to address these particular issues one by one? Because we have to start with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you have an infected tooth, you can't consider how to deal with your depression. So we try to help them unpack their needs one by one. And then mental health, I consider, is an ongoing opportunity for people, and thrives in community and thrives under rigor and structure. So that's what we try to do. Well, we have a telemental health provider that we work with. We have tons of group classes and group meetings. That's part of the world of recovery, is substance use disorder group meetings, whether it's AA or NA or whatever A. All of a sudden, for whatever ails you, there's a group that you can find, which is awesome.
Right. And I definitely think that, some of the core values that you mentioned that MaineWorks incorporates is that idea of the sense of community and structure, which helps individuals like reintegrate into society and really gives them the sense that they're not alone. They have someone to lean on, they have someone just to talk to. I think something that's common in a lot of the conversations I've had in this podcast is just having someone there for you who can empathize with you and just talk to you about your experiences is honestly one of the most important things when it comes to mental health and how you can deal with it yourself. Yes. So one thing I wanted to touch on as far as prison rehabilitation goes is, according to another statistic, 2 out of 3 former prisoners are rearrested once they exit jail, and more than 50% of them are once again incarcerated. Do you think that we can account for these statistics due to the inherent lack of mental health rehabilitation inside prisons and jails themselves?
Of course. If you think about just the history of the past 50 years of the prison system, and you could go further back, and I refer to further back in time in the turn of the century, that prisons were exactly what we expect, just a dim lifeless place that you were just held in captivity, really, frankly. And so that's the early stage of what prison looked like. And so we really haven't gotten that far beyond prison as warehousing people. And especially you'll see it in those huge cell structures in the middle of the country, where hundreds of people are in bunk beds in a huge space. And that's not a great environment to create any kind of community, or certainly and people have always said, jail is not rehab, jail is not social therapy. And other countries do this very well, actually. But in the United States, we don't have the will yet, but I think it's changing, to consider comprehensive inmate services from the moment they're arrested. Because the paradox is that the moment you're arrested is usually the moment at which you're most willing to hear about opportunities for you while you're incarcerated. The
Right.
further you get into the system, the more the isms kind of set in, like the isolationism and the defensiveness and those kinds of things. So as soon as the ideal would be, and I think it's starting to happen now to your question, is to do a better evaluation at the onset so that caseworker idea can follow that inmate during the course of their time of incarceration. And by the way, I don't know, Atishay, if your people that are listening might not understand the difference between jail and prison. You probably do, but just for your information, when someone is arrested, they're brought to jail and they're sentenced to jail if their sentence is 9 months or less in most states. And so that 9-month period, there's not really worth getting people involved in having an education system for a 9-month or less with a lot of turnover. So it's really hard to organize jail, but state prisons is where the opportunity is for cool things like, the puppy program and gardening and learning to do like parenting skills. So there's a lot more opportunity. It's happening. And derivative of that, of course, is the benefit to mental health to have a lot more outdoor time and counseling, therapy, music, all that kind of stuff happens when you're in prison. So the strange thing is that the longer sentence is probably the more productive.
Right. Thank you so much for sharing that information, Ms. Walsh. Moving on to the actual individuals that take advantage of MaineWorks' services. You mentioned the idea of having telemental health providers that your individuals work with, and also the opportunity that you have provided them with taking advantage of group sessions where, student or individuals who suffer from substance use disorder are now in the recovery stage. So have you found that individuals are taking advantage of these programs? And if they are, what benefit does that give to their mental health besides the fact that they have a sense of support and a sense of community to engage with?
Well, you can't undervalue what you just said, because feeling for the first time often that there is a sense of support and a sense of someone to talk to, and normalizing that kind of communication is the most important learning phase of that reentry process. Because again, if you go back to the characteristics that define incarceration, it's the opposite of community. So I feel like you just outlined a great and a very important point. However, in any sort of substance use program, there are 12 steps. Typically, you've heard of the 12 steps, and they break down into 3 tranches: give up the substance, clean up your act, and turn around and start giving back. And so you'll always hear people who are doing 12-step work talking about service work, because it's required that once you give up the substance, address some of the reasons that you were using to begin with, and then start to clean up your act and use your sort of transformation that you've experienced, whatever that is, towards others. That in the giving back is the kind of the saving grace, frankly. And I think it's phenomenal to see that happen, because most people who go through that process have never felt the therapeutic dopamine of actually doing something without expecting anything in return. So it's really fundamental, strangely, that these 12 steps, which were dreamed up, in the 1940s, but the idea is basically transcends all humanity, that says, in your quest, it's about turning yourself inside out. So you're no longer focusing only on what's wrong with you, but you can focus on how you can be of service to others. And so that's not to say that there aren't people who have suffered profound mental health challenges, especially things like trauma or depression or things, those ingrained mental health issues. So we don't expect to be able to address those without the help of trained mental health professionals. So we look at it as a cobbled resource where we can say, here, come on over and we'll do some service work over here, which will help you make you feel better. You can work with other recovering people or formerly incarcerated people. I just had a guy come in today who had 15 years incarcerated, and He's still on federal probation and now going to start at MaineWorks. And he felt so lifted because one of the guys he was talking to at MaineWorks had been formerly incarcerated for a long time also. So again, it's that empathy. So we're not solving the big ingrained problems. That's the field of trained mental health experts. What we're just trying to do is provide those more pedestrian ways of feeling better about yourself and therefore being in a better frame of mind to pursue life. And our mental health evaluation comes in the form of an intake form that basically says, what are your challenges? And then we'll refer them to the telemental health provider to help them articulate what their next course of therapy should be, including medication, of course, if necessary, and therapy.
Thank you so much for outlining those for our viewers. It provides a great outlook into what makes MaineWorks such a great organization and how it's focused on as you mentioned, the rehabilitation or abolition, of individuals who want to, re-enter back into the society and reintegrate themselves back into the society. So before I move on to the adolescent kind of mental health, I wanted to touch on your own personal story and how you kind of dealt with your recovery of substance use disorder and then perhaps your own mental health experiences along the way.
So Atishay, thank you so much for asking. I just remember when I was in high school and grade school and earlier on, I always got everything and never studied ever, frankly. So I just absorbed things and I can't believe I made it through. I certainly can't believe that but nonetheless, I always felt like I wanted to learn the next thing. And we didn't have the internet when I was growing up. We had the Guinness, the World Encyclopedia,
right?
Britannica, Encyclopedia Britannica, and I can see them all lined up. And I'd go in to start researching whales, and I'd end up on World War II, and then everything else in the W's except the whales. So I don't know if that resonates, but it's a curious mind that needs to know everything, but doesn't want to focus on the task at hand. So that's a classical ADD profile, of course. Mm-hmm. So I never, in my whole world, I felt like I was coursing with curiosity. I needed to do everything. I wanted to see everything. And so I did a decent job of channeling that. Frankly, I played sports and stuff. But once I discovered alcohol, I recognized that there was a way to regulate that feeling of slowing down and being kind of washed over. And if and I hope that no one here identifies with that firsthand, but it is a very common denominator among all people in addiction, is that they have discovered something that makes them feel regulated. So It's not just for being fun and the life of the party and all that. It's bigger than that. It's a feeling of release and relaxation or something. So anyway, I just want to say that because I was drinking over a disorder that I had had my whole life. Like I never had enough of anything. That's another addictive quality. So even if there was some candy in a bowl, I'd take the whole bowl. There was I never had a moderate. I never had a neutral. It was always flat out. Anyway, so I feel really strongly that that type of behavior manifests in, actually, you can use it well. You can be curious about everything. And I got to learn about everything. I always made an exception of myself in school so I could get that additional project. Again, because I couldn't focus on the one thing, I wanted to do all things. So when I see people at MaineWorks now, I recognize that scattered brain. That's a scatterbrain is what that was, derogatory to indicate that someone who couldn't sit still or just learn one thing at a time. So I feel like, I hope as brain science and neurodiversity is further researched, that we start to mine and appreciate and educate those brains differently. Because neurodiversity is the answer for this world, I think. People who think differently. And and I see it in you, by the way, my friend. and your curiosity and your engagement in so many ways, that's not normal. I mean, that what you have done in your young life is, defies the normal trend for certain attributes and accomplishments. And I just would say that we have to find a way to hyperdrive that profile so that you can become everything you want to be at the age of, by the time you're 23, you will have accomplished so much more than an average 23-year-old. So I'm really excited about it. And I look at it as I might have been a pioneer of it, and I just used my bandwidth. And once I was able to focus that on this particular thing that I'm doing, it's now, the paradox is that it's not at all focused. What I'm doing now is blowing open this idea of, how do you do prison reform in a better, more comprehensive and educational way? What about drug use, and how early should we talk about that? And so it's never just the one thing, it's all of this other stuff. And if I was just working at an office every day, I'd go in and do my task and then come home and forget it. So this job that I do now has opened up this, is a conduit to all of this stuff that only people who think that way could appreciate that and say, I get why you're doing global impact investing over here and talking to the inmate on this other end of the spectrum, all in one day. Does that make sense? Really hope so.
No, thank you so much for sharing that insight and for being vulnerable about your own experiences as well. I know a lot of individuals out there, whether they see this podcast or not, can resonate with the experiences that you have to share. So in the last minute or so we have left, could you please give your last closing remarks and what you hope to see mental health awareness amongst adolescents and adults alike, and for just like your brief overview on what it means to increase mental health awareness in prison rehabilitation as well?
So, Atishay, I think it goes so far back up the river to early childhood care that there is an opportunity for young people to be safe in their home, that there's stability and structure, that every family should, if they have a family, they should have a place to sleep and raise children and put them in early childhood development programs. So the more engagement, the better the outcomes. And I know that for a fact. I've seen it so many times. And I would really say that when you have a family that you come across, which I do all the time, who have generational incarceration, that you need to spend extra time with those children in the early years. And so that to me is earlier intervention, and then working with the school systems so that behavior problems are not pulled out of class, but they're in, because when you have students who are showing signs and symptoms of obstructive behavior or autism or ADD, they're usually, unless they're disruptive, they're just mainstreamed as well as possible. And I think that's an incredible disservice. I think we definitely should be focusing tons of funding and research at the early childhood level to curtail this as an outcome.
Gotcha. Well, thank you so much, Ms. Walsh, for sharing your insights today on MaineWorks, your own personal experiences, and on the general view of prison rehabilitation and the importance of mental health reform. Thank you so much again for being here today.
It's an honor, and thank you so much for having me. Great to see you.